Good morning, everybody. Is everybody ready for a fantastic second day? Good, good. We're all here because of Beth Chatto's vision, and it's really interesting to think about that idea of legacy and what she set up in terms of really sound, good horticultural practice mixed with wonderful plantsmanship and also a very particular way that she had of communicating and being involved in education. And I'm very interested in this idea of legacy, really, this idea of looking back to what has formed where we are now, and then how we might move those ideas forward into the future so that they keep modern, as forward-thinking as they were, but moving on with the times. And as we've seen, even with the amount of time that we've been coming to these conferences, ideas are moving quickly now, and we're all re-engaging very much more, for instance, with the crisis that's happening in nature today, and seeing ourselves as being really quite key and pivotal in being able to help with that as positive agents of change. And Beth would have been right up for that. She would have been right here, being excited behind the whole idea of this progressive way of thinking. So I just wanted to sort of give some more context really for what this remarkable person was. And for me, I discovered Beth just very briefly at the beginning of this little talk, when I was a teenager, in my early teens, going to Chelsea when she was there. And this is a photograph from my diary when I was at a Wisley student in my late teens. And it says here, I can't read it from this distance, but this was my favorite stand of the show. And I'd already seen these stands, from age sort of 11, 12. And Beth's stands always had something very particular about them. There was exquisite plantsmanship. There was always something that you could learn from them. There was a sunshade, dry shade section. So they were really working very hard. But they were beautiful little compositions with things that simply weren't being grown anywhere else at that point. And her catalogue, Unusual Plants, would be, I'd take it back on the train on the way back with my dad and pore through it. And in those descriptions, she'd somehow managed to bring those magical plants off the page into your imagination and make you feel that you wanted to be part of that world that she had created in that few small square meters. So it was really a very powerful thing to meet that at the Chelsea Flower Show when nobody else was doing naturalism. So she was way ahead of her time. In a way, she was a key person in this country for that whole period that happened in Europe with naturalism continuing with Carl Förster and those people from the early 1900s. And we had Robinson and Jekyll, and then there was a sort of gap. And then Beth picked it up and kept it going and moved it forwards and really paved the way for where we are today. And I think a lot of what she set up is very much taken for granted now. It's just become part of the way that we look at things. So a remarkable person doing remarkable things and working on many different levels. And I referred to her writings and still do. She's a go-to place. I use her catalogue regularly when I'm putting my planting plans together. I go to her books because she has wise words. She was growing these plants herself over many years. It's really the only way you know about a plant. A description in a catalogue is one thing, but actually growing it for 3, 5, 10, 20 years. I shall never forget this little lecture I was in with Beth where we were in a questions and answers, and I was talking about Smyrnium perfoliatum, that wonderful ephemeral that comes in the spring, and saying that I was struggling with getting it going, and I pushed it at the end of the garden, and I thought it would be okay where it was, and she said, "Just you wait." And I just knew, and this was in front of everybody, and it was kind of exposing. And of course, that's exactly what it did, because she'd had all that time of growing it. So you can really trust those words that she penned so beautifully in these books. from her garden where she was growing all these things. So the garden really was a manifestation, the words were a manifestation of the garden, and likewise both worked with each other very beautifully. And it was a place that you could go where you could trust the plantsmanship. You still do, it's still there, it's still up and running and functioning. And Beth's vision really stepped through a whole series of different environments, got us used to this idea of there being right plant, right place, working with your habitat, looking to the natural conditions as the lead for things, not forcing things to do what they shouldn't. We all know this now, it's part of the way that we work. And she was thinking about all that and writing about all that from the very heart of the garden where she lived in her house, which was alongside the nursery, looking out over the damp garden with all these plants, all these wonderful plants around them. And when we stayed there last night, we felt incredibly fortunate to be in the middle of this and imagining what it was like for her sitting at her writing desk, looking out over this view that she'd arranged and this composition that was particular to her, that was still so strong and still so viable, a really wonderful environment that had been created that really worked in a very pragmatic way, but also with aesthetics very much in mind as well. And each of those areas in the garden, they're still beautiful places. They're still places that work in a very true and meaningful way. So the ditch garden along the bottom, the water garden, comes out of the fact that the water was there and there was this seam of clay. Then, she moved around the site, just moving this forwards, to the dry garden. I think I'm missing one here. Yes, the dry garden, of course, which was so much ahead of its time, and never more timely than now, when we're going into this very unpredictable seasonal cycles of dry summers, wet when we don't think we're going to get it. And there that garden is, up and running, still functioning, still working. She was extremely strict about what she did. This didn't get any water. So it's a true place. It's somewhere that has incredible integrity. And all those things stack up and come together as being somewhere that really feels like it needs to be preserved. We're all part of that now. And we're all moving those ideas forwards in a kind of diaspora, I suppose, of different manifestations of the same ideas. And one of the wonderful things I think about the nursery and the garden in their juxtaposition is that I can't think of many places where I go to a garden to see a fantastic range of plants that are displayed very well and thoughtfully together. And then I can walk into the nursery and I can actually buy those things. You don't go to Wisley and find something you've just seen on the rock garden, or you're lucky to. It feels much more specific. Those plants, most of them, 2,500 plants they have on their list that they propagate, are from the garden itself. And that is a wonderful thing to know that if you're wanting an unusual plant, you're wanting something particular, it's a go-to place. It's my go-to place when I want something that's going to make a planting plan sing for the fact that there's something particular. And that is something which really needs to be thought through in terms of where is that going next? Beth paved the way for this thing, made it, it's been up and running, and but what next? Where does that lead to? So Beth set up the Education Trust in 2017, and this was the opening day. And it was a wonderful thing to really feel part of in a very small way. And what they've done with the Education Trust really is put a lot of that thinking out into the world and start to make the place work really hard. They have a schools outreach program as part of the Educational Trust. They have a horticultural course, which is a starting horticultural course to work with plants to get people integrated and up and running and knowing more about plants. They have an RHS certificate that's run from there. Darryl Moore, who is working very closely with them, is looking to work on Andrew Chatto's with all his research that he did to make it into a book. He was a very pivotal part of how Beth thought, because he was looking at ecologies really as the inspiration of where things grew and what with. And there's this huge wealth of information that's just sitting there waiting to be pulled together. So that's a project that will come through in the future. And then there are various up and running projects, live projects, which are really starting to change the way that people are potentially able to live in new housing developments like Chatterwood, which is a new project fairly nearby, where the developers wanted to use Beth's name. And the team here thought, okay, let's see how we can work with that. And they've then planted the front gardens and the streets of this development using these plants from here. And it's not just grass and turf and trees. You know, this is a dynamic environment where there's 20%, is it 20% more? I've lost the figure, but there's 20 times more, biodiversity because of the planting than there would have been if there had been the simple landscaping that's usually recommended. And there are new projects which are going to roll out around Colchester, which they're also talking to the developers about being involved in as well. So the garden starts to grow beyond its reach, and people start to come to terms with the idea that actually you can have something that's low maintenance and beautiful and good for wildlife. It's ecologically rich, it's sustainable, it's not using huge amounts of water, and it looks a damn sight better than turf and trees, brown turf and trees. So it's really very up and running, vigorous thing, the Education Trust. And Darryl Moore has been working on a meanwhile garden with the Beth Chatto team in Colchester to inhabit a leftover place, which has just recently been planted up, and it's become something that people can engage with instead of walk by and avoid. And there are beautiful plants growing on this piece of rubble, which are showing people really the potential of these leftover places and these halfway places that could become something more, rather than just places you turn away from when you walk past them. So vigorous stuff that's moving us all forward very positively. So the crux of the conversation here today, really, and why I'm talking to you, is that the team here, Julia and Joe, have asked our studio to look at this idea of legacy and how do you move a garden forward when your leader is no longer there. Your leader who set up all these strong and very important ways of thinking that are still completely viable. But as you can see already, the garden is beginning to show in places where Beth is no longer there. So we've been looking at producing a master plan for the site to address two important changes that are happening. In the top, there is a future housing development. You can see where the car park is. I haven't got my pointer. But there's a development which is going to come across and sever the property from the road. The Beth Chatto Gardens could have sold up, made a whole load of money to the developers who would have bought the site, but that's absolutely not in their consciousness. So what they've done is they've negotiated with the developers, and the new road is going to come through the middle to enter the car park differently instead of at the side. That will be planted with Beth Chatto plants to come up to meet the road. And then that will automatically make a series of changes that need to be addressed in terms of how you enter the site what the feeling is like when you get there. And then that precipitates a series of other thoughts, which are, how has this garden been working? You know, it's evolved in a piecemeal way with one project moving on after another. It's probably never had a whole master plan. So the master plan is a blueprint, really, for the future to look at where things could be improved, how you might make changes where things have become tired, how you might make better connections where things have just evolved by default. And this is something that allows them then to move the garden forward and for this legacy to be progressing in a way which is manageable, so you can take off bite-sized chunks. One of the exciting projects that they've brought forward as a next chapter, because the garden's always been about chapters of change, is a piece of land on the left-hand side of the image here, has been acquired along this eastern boundary, southern boundary, northern boundary. I got there in the end. And it is a piece of farmland which, if you go out into the fields, it's been robbed of all its goodness. Eddie is hopefully going to give us some good advice on how to bring that round. We're working out what to do with that now, but it gives the gardener an opportunity to extend out and do something interesting, which we're working on now and will be revealed to you when we know exactly what that is. So the process that we're going through now is looking at all these different parts of the garden and looking how they work together, how the garden might be improved, and then we're going to work through slowly with the gardening team, who are all very excited about this change, to go through the garden and think about how Beth thought about it, channel Beth with the changes, so that she comes through. We're putting ourselves very much in the background as designers on this and thinking about how would she have treated this and how, had she been given another gardening life, would she have moved this forward? She would, we know, have been progressive. She would have expected there to be change. She would have moved things on. And that's where we are and what we need to do now. So we will, I think, in the next conference, have something more confident to show you once we've dug a little bit beneath the surface on this one. We just thought it would be useful to have maybe 10 minutes of questions and ask Julia and Joe, MD, up to answer some questions about what next, legacy, anything you'd like to ask on these subjects. So thank you.
Thanks.
Harriet.
Oh.
I've got a big mouth.
That's it.
People can hear me anyway. Well, I was quite emotional when you said that, actually. I've got to be honest. I thought it's so right and give everybody confidence that change has to happen, because that aspic feeling that can sometimes, when you don't want to upset somebody else's work. So bravo to Team Chatto on that. I guess a question as in, it's about communication, Kelsey, please. How might you make sure that this is captured from the outset in a way that reaches the wider world? Because this idea of change and what other people may be able to emulate or take inspiration from, often it's in these small chambers we hear it. So I'm just interested if that's part of the strategy, is a communication strategy as well.
Yeah.
Well, we do like to talk, don't we, Julia?
We do, yeah. Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Handing over.
We would want every step to be kind of recorded, shown. We want people to come along on the journey with us, which is why I wanted to talk about it now. We've just acquired this new piece of land. It's going to need loads and loads of work. It's going to take many years. And yeah, so we thought now's the time to talk about it. Now we've got it, you know. So yeah, we'll definitely be sharing the information.
And we want to make sure that when people visit the site, or when they look at the site from afar, that they can actually see where we are, you know, our successes and, you know, things that we might have had to change along the way. So we're all about sharing. You might get a bit fed up with us, but we'd ask you. We're so excited about it, and we feel the same way that you said, Arit, is this emotional feeling when something just feels completely right.
I think there's some little films that have been made about the Chatterwood project, for instance, and there'll be more of that, won't there, that will happen along the way. So various mediums are coming together. The ecologist, for instance, working on the site, his information will be brought forwards and through. And there are all these other layers that are part of this project, which will become visible as part of this project.
Part of the problem for me sometimes is I think I'm waiting for the project to be finished and then I'll do it. But obviously, it's never going to be finished. It's ever changing, always moving on. So the same with the Chatterwood thing. We've been quite quiet about that, really, because it was an experiment and we weren't sure. Was it going to work? Was it not going to work? But now I'm feeling more confident. We will be sharing the information, in a more timely fashion.
And also, we do want to leave a record of what we're doing, because the next generation of Beth's family and the next generation in the future for the gardeners will need to understand that longer history. And one thing we've done with Dan and Matthew and Hugh as well is to be immersed in the garden, but also spend time with Beth's surviving daughter, Mary, to talk about her experience of growing up in the garden and how that changed, to give us a kickstart on some of the history. So the more information we can leave for future generations to be able to put their stamp on it, the better, I think.
And I think at the moment, there's still a lot of oral history, isn't there? Because the people who've worked with Beth very closely in the nursery, for instance, who've learnt all that from her, that's going to come through in this research that we're doing now to try and understand where we're going and what the thinking was. Because the compositions you can read, have often got a little story behind them, and they then become more interesting. Each of the plants have got a story. And it's so layered. That's what's so interesting about it. And I think it's just working out which layers you decide to reveal first, or where you feel your energy needs to be applied, because this is a small team who work very hard and produce these amazing things. But it's one of the wonderful things about a garden, about this process, is that we are in process. It's never finished. And I think bringing people on board with that process is something that's actually very exciting.
Yeah.
I think it is really exciting, and congratulations, really. We're in a similar boat because we've been fighting to defend the legacy of the charity Land Life and the National Wildflower Centre in Liverpool. And the future of that does link to these kinds of spaces. So, for example, housing co-ops with groups like Mandela 8 in Liverpool, which have a really personal connection to the Mandela family, and a link to the Mandela Field of Hope in the public park. But it's also how you reach out to the kind of meanwhile bits of land that pop along. And I would just wonder if you've got opportunities which we've really tried hard, for example, with the nature recovery strategy for the Liverpool City region, to kind of embed that in Essex with, obviously all the stuff that's going on and links to, John and other people.
We've been in conversation with John Meehan, who's the head of Climate Recovery Zone for Essex. I'm not sure that that's his actual job title, but anyway, apparently he's very senior within the Essex Council team. And he's really interested in the work we're doing, and so we're trying to work with him to get more spaces. So obviously the Meanwhile Gardens, step one, and we would like to help with other projects, but we, as Dan said, we're a really small team and there's only so much we can do. But, we are excited to share our knowledge of plants and selecting plants that will work well in different areas, that they're not going to get a lot of care necessarily or maintenance on an ongoing basis.
We are linked up with the local farm cluster, which is, has been quite useful, bringing together people with responsibility for smaller parcels of land that can be joined together and maybe get finance to be able to improve connected waterways and improve corridors. So we're always there with our hand up, even though we might, you know, be small. We'll get in there.
Any? Oh.
Sorry, I just wondered whether Chatto Wood is on that map of yours.
No, it's not.
Is it further away then?
It's further. Yes, it's next door but one. So next door to the gardens, there's an industrial estate. Well, it's a light industrial estate, and then beside that is the Chatto Wood development. So it's got nothing to do with us other than that they wanted to honour Beth by using her name, which I thought she won't be very happy about that at all. Not at all. So, but anyway, yeah, we said, right, okay, if you want to do that, you've got to let us do the planting. And we thought we can use this as a great experiment, you know, with real life human beings and houses.
And the developer, you know, the developer was really forward thinking. It would have been a lot
allowing
cheaper.
us to do it, yeah.
Yeah, would have been a lot cheaper. But, you know, I don't think Julia said, I think you'd have to let us plant. I think she said, yeah, but we're going to plant the front of your gardens like this, and if you build it there.
I just wondered, because one of our contributors wrote about the Chatto Wood. She'd come on a course.
Yes.
And that was part of the article. Hardy Plant Society Journal.
Ah, right, yes, yeah. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I think you'll be presenting it on Saturday at the Gardens, at the Ruderalls.
Yeah, that's right. So we'll be talking about it there.
This is very exciting, and with the master plan, you know, there's always a time element, and I wondered, in terms of phased implementation with the housing development that's going to happen adjacent to the property and the new drive, do you have a sense of what the timing is for that and the new planting along the drive, and then ideas for that adjacency of the new housing to the parking area?
I'll start very quickly with the actual housing development. They have put in for planning permission, then they withdrew the planning permission requests. They haven't put it back in again yet, so it might not happen, you know, but if it does happen, and it's not our land, there's nothing we can do about it other than try and get the best that we can for the garden. And so we negotiated with them to say, okay, if you're going to build these houses, you know, if you don't want us to really kick up a fuss and complain, you need to work with us, and we need a new driveway, because our new driveway would actually be a lot safer. Where we are at the moment, it's really on a blind bend of a very fast road, so they agreed to that, and we agreed to work with them on that basis. So time-wise, who knows, you know, but yeah.
But I think it's precipitated a whole chain of thought in terms of getting this master plan in place, and the beauty of it is that some of that can be started by the gardeners, just making changes in the garden that are looking at where things have got overgrown and views have been lost, for instance, you know, so it can be started in quite a subtle way, which is very gentle change and respectful change. But I think it's interesting how these big changes often precipitate a new thought process. So we're thinking about how the entrance works. Could that work better, for instance?
And, you know, I feel it in the garden, and people talk about the emotion and that evokes when you're in the garden, and the calmness and the beauty. And, you know, some people say, oh, it's a shame you're being surrounded by houses. Well, that's given us more of an impetus to make sure that that calm, beautiful, peaceful place is going to be there for at least the next 60 years.
Yeah.
Even if we're not.
Yeah. Oh, one lady over there. Far. Yeah.
No, just wait.
Joe's waiting over here as well.
It's more of a comment, but I just wanted to say I think it's wonderful because it's a real example based on what was discussed yesterday in terms of design time, ecological time, clients, press time, that you're showing an example of how thoughtful design does take time, and it is working with the land and not, you know, just rushing in, doing all this stuff, and it's a much easier and more adaptive way of design without disrupting a lot of things. And sometimes through that process, even more of Beth will be channeled through that process. So I just really commend you. It's so exciting, and looking forward to seeing what happens. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Joe, did you have a question?
Joe, sorry.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a very quick one. It's just quite a simple question. You've probably already thought about it, but I just wondered if you could tell us how the work the Education Trust is doing with the outreach programs and how that might fit in with the long-term planning, master planning, and other opportunities that might come up along the way for outreach programs and engaging those local groups in this process.
Good question. Our Education Trust is really what we're all about. So we're a business, we have to make money, we have to pay gardeners, we have to pay them a fair wage as well. And we're really committed to that. But the Education Trust is kind of where our heart is. And that's where we want to share information, and we would like to be doing more professional development courses, using experts that come on, you know, and talk at these events, and that's something that we're looking to do going forward. But yeah, we want to share that with, in an educational way, yeah.
And in a very open way, Joe, open to all, you know, for all different levels, and being able to do something like this, and you fantastic people come and take part, and it fills the coffers for the Education Trust, so that we can say yes when something's really a good idea and it needs to be done, but there's no money. That's not the money thing. It doesn't bother Julia and I. If you say there is no money for this project, we think, well, we'll find a way to get it done anyway. So if we believe in it. So I think a bit of grit, determination, and constant communication. We've got to be able to change some people's minds.
Yeah.
And I think with the master plan as well, that will allow the team, for instance, to say, okay, we could make a film about this.
Yeah.
Or we could bring this group of people in to help us plant that. You know, so it's a blueprint which allows you to then pace yourself to make the decisions, to allow yourself opportunity of time to get the funding in place for things to happen. So it sets a pathway for a lot of things to be pulled together.
One last question.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask quickly, Dan, is there going to be a better provision for people who want to cycle to the gardens, more active travel? I'm sure you've already thought of this, but I thought it's an important question to ask.
Well, you might have seen the plans for the new housing development. If they put them in again, it had cycle paths, both sides, from the village down the road. And anybody who would like to come on their feet or on their cycle or public transport already gets rewarded, you know,
with a discounted
on entry.
admission.
Yeah.
Also, they get to park their bicycle in a beautiful green roof shelter
Yes.
from John Lytton.
Hey!
Yeah.
Julia.
Yeah.
He's behind
Hey,
you.
and here he is. Yeah, he obviously heard me. Thank you very much, Dan. And I've just got to say how so delighted we are and lucky we are to have Dan, and that Dan was, you know, Beth's favourite, probably Beth's favourite child. Wasn't her child.
I think so.
She absolutely loved him, and yeah, I know that she'd be really happy about this. And the other thing to say is that our garden team and Ursa's at the top there, really happy. Is that right, Ursa? Am I happy? Yeah. So, thank you, Dan.
Thank you.